Hello, today we're going to talk about how to create a trip in APDL manually. Starting out in this sample log here today, but this will of course work in your logged in data as well. So I'm in the sample log. I've deleted the trip that is normally on the current day. To create a trip manually, we can do that from a number of places. We can do that from the schedule screen, or we could do that from the calendar screen. Process is the same either way. Today's the 30th, so I could tap here on the day of the 30th and do create another duty period, long call reserve, reserve availability period, short call reserve, reserve availability period, or airport standby. I'm going to tap disregard here, go back to the schedule view, show that we can do exactly the same thing here. Same options as in the calendar view. So I'm going to select duty period. If you're a line holder, that's the normal selection you would make here. We're brought to the new duty period page. Trip number is active. We can enter at this point whatever our trip number is. I'm going to just call this T1234. Report date is already pre-entered as we selected August 30th. The duty time, I could enter at this time the duty on time and the duty off time. I'm going to just leave that at noon, and I'll set 1700 local for the duty off time. I'm going to tap on the duty off line here to close that. It shows that it is a 5-hour duty period, and I'm going to hit save. If those duty times aren't exactly accurate, that doesn't matter. We can come back and adjust those later, or they can be automatically adjusted. Now I'm in the trip view in edit mode. As can be told, you can tell from the upper right there was a done button there. If I tap edit, it goes back into the edit mode, and we have a blank segment as well as a button that says add segment and add duty period down at the bottom. So far we have nothing here. We just have the date, 30th of August, as well as the duty period starting at 12 and ending at 1700 local. And since the sample log domicile is Chicago, we have the identifier for Chicago Airport here right after that. I'm going to go with creating a new segment here. I can tap either on the add segment line or on this blank segment here. It comes up as default payroll category of block. That is a standard that you would use for a standard line holder segment. Many other options here as you can choose from. We're going to stick with block. Flight number, this is just going to be a test, so I'm going to call this 5432. Here on the airport selection screen, we have 4 tabs across the top. I can tap the tabs across the top to change from a list of US airports to world airports, recently selected airports, or search for any airport by name or identifier, however I would like. In this case, I'm going to use the search to type in the airports that I need. For purposes of the sample mode or sample log, I'm going to start with Chicago, and let's call it Denver. The aircraft I'm going to leave blank at this point. I don't know what tail number I'm going to be in. I was just assigned the trip, so I'm going to leave that blank. At this time I can put in the scheduled departure time. Let's just call that 13:15, just as an example. Go ahead and close that. That was 13:15 local. And I'm going to call the arrival time, let's call it 3 hours. So that would be 21:15 Zulu there. And I don't know what the actual times would be at this time. I'm going to leave the legality calculation on automatic. If I know it's going to be augmented or reserve or split duty or unaugmented, I could select those, but automatic works most of the time. Position, captain, pilot, flying, I'm just going to leave that as the default there. And then I'm finished with that entry. I can go ahead and save that and enter as many other flights as I like. I can tap this to create more entries. If I have another day on the trip, I can click this add duty period segment or section there. Same thing, as before. It's part of the same T1, 2, 3, 4 trip. The next date is the 31st. Duty on and duty off are now available for me to edit. We'll just make the same thing in this case, 12 to 1700. And I can hit save again, and I can continue creating segments on that day. I'm going to skip that for this example. Go ahead and hit done. Now, as you can see, I have my Chicago to Denver flight entered. This pre-entered. It shows that it is a block, standard block flight, departing scheduled at 13:15, arrival in Denver at 15:15 local, and that is a 3-hour block scheduled time. We see on the summary line here we have 3 hours of credit and 3 hours of block, because at this point it has not taken place yet. And I did not enter in hotel information. I could tap this line and enter hotel information, hotel phone number, whatever number I enter in there can be called by tapping the call hotel line. And I can put in notes about the hotel by double tapping, as in the note down here at the bottom. But I'm going to skip that for now. Now, as I come up to this flight and I complete the flight or get in the aircraft, I can come back and select an aircraft. Say it's the aircraft tail number is test 1. And go in and enter my actual times. Let's say we got out of the gate a few minutes early. I'm going to call that 13:10. Now I can tap on the off line here, move ahead to the off entry. I can copy the numbers straight off of my ACARS if the aircraft has ACARS. Straight directly in UTC, which is my personal preference. So let's just say we're off at 22. Landing time, we'll leave that at 21:10 Zulu. And let's say we got in at 21:30. We had a headwind. At this point I can tap the block flight line to close the editor there. And I get an automatic calculation of 3 hours 20 minutes block and 2 hours 48 minutes flight time. The 3 hour 20 minutes is an overblock, so the flight took a little longer than the scheduled time was. I could change my position if, say, I wasn't the pilot flying for this leg, I was pilot monitoring. I could change that. That will cause APDL to not credit me with the landing. If there was night, it would automatically be calculated at this time, which it is not. Or I could manually enter it if I chose to override that. And I can also go to instrument. I can enter it, say we had 30 minutes of instrument time. Notice the set instrument to 2 plus 48 is showing me the entire flight portion from off to on. If the entire flight was in instrument conditions, I can just tap that and it will automatically enter 248 for me. I'm going to change that back to 0:30. As well as night, set night to 0 plus 00. That's the value that APDL automatic night calculation came up with, in case I edited it accidentally and decided I wanted to go back with the automatically generated time. If we flew an approach, I can select the type of approach here. I'm going to say we flew an ILS. If I like, I could make a note of what the ILS runway was. I could also go down here and find a little bit of information about each airport, coordinates, which gate, if the gate information was automatically downloaded from our cloud resources. Sunrise and sunset times, including twilight, which are used for the automatic night calculation, and those are for both airports. For crew members, I could enter in whoever I flew with. In this case, I don't have any crew members previously entered, so I can just create myself here. Say I'm the captain, and here's going to be my first officer. Create a new one here. New FO, select FO for him. His ID is 25797, and select him. If I had flight attendants, I could enter those here. I want to point out a very important difference here between the cabin crew entry section and the other crew entry section. If you notice, the note at the bottom says the cabin crew inputs such as flight attendants do not participate in legality calculations, while the other crew A and B do affect legality. The difference being, if you were to enter a name in the other crew A or other crew B section here, APDL would assume that you mean you had a relief flight officer for a 3 or 4 flight crew flight, which would automatically cause the legality calculations to transition into augmented flight operations. Whereas if we were to enter a flight attendant in the other crew A or other crew B field, that would be incorrectly put us in augmented operations. We have seen a few support requests come in with confusion about those, so we did want to clarify that. The proper place for the flight attendant entries is in the cabin crew A and B, and those will not affect the legality calculations for number of crew. And then the crew shows up in the crew line. Hit save on this. Now, if you remember, we overblocked on this flight. We can now see that our credit has increased to 320 as well as our block, and we see the plus 20 on both of those, indicating both of those have increased by 20 minutes compared to what the original schedule was. This process would continue throughout the rest of the trip. At the bottom here we have a summary for the entire trip. In this case, we only have one leg, but the totals will be added there. No landings credited to me since I was pilot monitoring for that leg, and the total time away from base. Now I want to go back and talk about the duty time and flight duty period times that we entered in previously when we first created this new duty period. When we first entered those times, we had no departure or destination airports entered at that time, so APDL does not know what time zone to use for those times. It assumes that both of those times are going to be in our domicile airport time zone. In this case, the sample log domicile airport is Chicago. So all of our times were based on Chicago time. You'll remember we entered 12 o'clock and 1700. Now that we've entered a flight, this would also apply if we had multiple flights. The destination of the last flight of that day is Denver in our case. It's only one flight, but if there were multiple, Denver would be it would use the last one, which in our case is Denver. And Denver time is one time zone west of Chicago. So APDL has done the time conversion for us from Chicago time to Denver time. So our 1700 duty off time in Chicago has now been converted to 1600 duty off time in Denver. Same time frame, still a 5-hour duty period. It's just converted to the appropriate time zone. You can see that our times in this case are all in local time according to each individual airport at the top of the trip view here by scrolling down to reveal the title bar. For the flight duty period line, you can see our report time was 12 o'clock, which is what we entered when we first reported to the airport. That's when our flight duty period began, and APDL has automatically adjusted our flight duty period end time to be the block end time of the last flight of that day. To reduce confusion, since FAR 117 handles time zones based on the acclimated theater, we've chosen to display flight duty period times in a single time zone, which is indicated here with the ORD identifier in parentheses to show that both of those times are in Chicago time despite the local indication in the title bar. So since our flight duty period ends when the last flight comes to rest, block in, it does not include a release time that may be a number of minutes after block in. Our block in time in Denver of 15:30 is converted to Chicago time, which is 16:30, and that gives us a 4-hour 30-minute flight duty period with a 5-hour duty period. It is quite common to have, as I said, a period of time after block in that is still considered duty before you're released into rest. APDL can automatically make those adjustments for us, so we don't have to manually enter in each one of these duty off times after our last flight is, say, delayed and lands at a different time or earlier time, later time or earlier time than originally expected. All right, I'm going to go into the duty times page by tapping either the duty line or the flight duty period line. Either one will take me to the same place. In this case, I'm tapping the duty line. And we have our originally entered duty on and duty off times here as we entered them earlier. Of course, now adjusted to Denver time as we previously discussed. And I have this adjust duty times green button here that I can use to adjust those duty on and duty off times according to the actual flights that I flew that day. At my airline, for example, we have a 45-minute report time prior to the first scheduled departure time and 15-minute after the last block in for release time. The default settings in APDL are set to 1 hour prior and 15 minutes after for this example. And if I tap this button, it'll adjust those for me. Now the first time I tap it, I get this pop-up that says data is locked against inadvertent editing, and I can tap the lock button to disable that so I can make an adjustment. I'm going to do that now. Now I have the adjust duty times enabled, and I can make that adjustment here. As you can see, my duty on time has been adjusted to 1 hour, in this case prior to the departure time of the first flight, and the duty off time has been adjusted to 15 minutes after block in of the last flight. So as we can see here, our duty time has now been adjusted to 15:45, which is 15 minutes after arrival or block in Denver, and then our actual time of departure from Chicago was 13:10, but our duty time has been adjusted to 12:15. The reason for that is it's based on our original scheduled out time, not our actual scheduled out time, or I'm sorry, not our actual out time. If you showed up to the airport, the time you showed up was still the time you showed up, regardless of if you left the airport, if you left the gate early or not. So we can see our duty and flight duty periods have been adjusted here. The appropriate times according to the way the settings are set up in settings and airline. They can all be adjusted for a number of different factors. And now our resulting duty and flight duty period durations are 4 hours 30 minutes and 4 hours 15 minutes. This adjustment can be set to automatically happen for you. If you go to settings and airline, you can enable automatically adjust duty times, so you don't have to go to the duty page here and hit the adjust duty times button every day that you fly. And that's manually creating a trip in APDL. Thanks for watching.